Hello and welcome to episode 75 of On Liberty, coming to you live from the Center for Independent Studies in Sydney, Australia. I'm your host, Salvatore Babonis, and joining me today is multi-award-winning journalist Rowan Callick, a veteran analyst and author and currently an industry fellow at Griffith University's Asia Institute. Rowan Callick, how are you?
Hi, Salvatore. I'm really well, thank you. In Melbourne, we're all happily out there, free to go as we want, more or less.
Good to hear it. Well, we're going to move from talking about the People's Republic of Victoria to the People's Republic of China. There's been so much news this year coming out of China: the Evergrande collapse, the crackdown on video games, banning of the tutoring industry virtually overnight, semiconductor champions being allowed to fail, the temporary disappearance of Alibaba chairman Jack Ma, cross-strait aggression. It seems like everything is happening. Rowan Callick, what is going on in China?
Well, we're seeing Xi Jinping, the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, consolidating his power ahead of very crucial party congress, which happens every 5 years, a year from now. He had to navigate, first of all, the centenary of the party in mid-year. Those events are always create some vulnerability for the party. Anniversaries often attract criticism and can attract awkward, what they call mass incidents and so on. So he wanted to make sure he was in full control of that. And therefore, he's been on the front foot. He's a front foot kind of guy. And he's pushed into the world. So he wants the world to adapt to the party rather than the party to have to adapt to the world, because his key aim is to have the party be in a position to control its own destiny within China and outside, because this is a globalized world. China can't completely lock itself away. So that's been a crucial thing. He's also moved within China to subjugate the western parts of the country under a sort of Han ethno-nationalist crusade in Tibet, Xinjiang. And then the third step, the more recent one that you alluded to, is business. So this is a big and risky venture on his part, trying to wrest control of the business sector from the entrepreneurs to comment to the party, in effect. And he's come up with this formula of common prosperity, which harks back to the Mao era of the 50s. And he's holding out the prospect of everyone else benefiting from the filthy rich being forced to spread their wealth around. So that's the idea. And this is a very difficult thing to pull off, because he doesn't want to impose property taxes, because all sorts of information will emerge about many people in the party's middle and senior ranks. What do they own? How many properties? How did they get it? And then he doesn't want to force local governments to allow migrants to be able to legally reside and call on local services, because they would jack up too. So he's finding it quite difficult, but he's in charge of the rhetoric. And we've seen that very big time in the last few days with the 6th plenum, or the 6th meeting of the party central committee of about 300 odd people that meets between those party congresses. This sounds really dull to most people outside China who aren't sort of party wonks, as someone like myself is to an extent. but it's crucial because it provides the setting and enables him to push forward. His real interests are in history, in ideology, in education, and he fights against historical nihilism because, of course, he's a Marxist. And Rana Mitter, a British sinologist, has recently said she has given himself full marks. Not a bad phrase. And so controlling history in a Marxist sense is not just the past, but the present and the future. We control the destiny. We can explain exactly what's happening. And so there's been a resolution, historical resolution passed in the last few days in Beijing by the top echelons of the party. There was one in 1945 with Mao installed at the start of the Great Civil War, which led to the victory against the Kuomintang, the nationalists, in 1949. Then 1981, a rare situation where the party conceded it had made some mistakes, and Deng Xiaoping emerged to open the doors to Chinese people to prosper. And now we've got this one. And in some ways, it's elevating Xi even above Deng to the level of Mao, installing him in canonical history. The China policy, quite a good analytical organization, has said this is like putting him on China's Mount Rushmore. And
but
yeah.
What I don't understand is until this year, most international affairs analysts would have thought that the technology industry was a foundation of China's power and of China's challenge to US dominance. Yet we've seen these designated semiconductor champions be allowed to fail. We've seen Alibaba come under attack by the central government. We've seen even, WeChat's parent company be bullied into submission. This doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like a winning strategy for China in its geopolitical competition with the West.
Xi Jinping is convinced that the party knows best in all areas. So it knows actually how to control risk. And while I agree with you, I myself had thought she had sensibly left the tech giants to one side, because while some of the physical platforms were just borrowed from largely American inventors, they devised some very interesting business strategies to commercialize them and make them succeed in a remarkable way. But of course, the Chinese state had also protected them and kept out their chief competitors from America and Europe. But I think the time had come. The time has come when Xi has felt he has to have the last say in every area of life, and he's devised this new great plan for the economy called dual circulation, in which China is more protected from the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune the rest of the world, as we saw in the global financial crisis, which was the event that really decided China. They're on the winnings. They're winning. That socialism is the right way to go. And so there's this one, the main circulation is domestic, protected circulation with the production, innovation, the market, and then there's the internationally connected part. But he's not letting companies go overseas to raise funds even significantly these days. And so they're being kept at home. I agree with you. I think that this will probably be a big mistake, but he felt that he had to grapple this down. And he said this quite recently. He said, in today's world, if you want to say which political party, which country and which nation can be confident, then the Communist Party of China, the People's Republic of China, and the Chinese nation have the most reason to be confident. So this kind of confidence is infectious, and also it's being imposed, of course.
We're talking to journalist Rowan Callick, author of the recent CIS paper, She Dreams of 100 More Glorious Years for the Party. Might China Awake? And Rowan, in your latest column for The Australian, you call Xi Jinping's new era policy a, quote, high stakes revolution. Just what are the stakes here, and how revolutionary is what Xi Jinping has been doing?
Well, the stakes are particularly high because of the extent to which he's rapidly centralized and personalized policy making and decision making. And he came to his position telling the party elders at the time, 2011 really, that he could be trusted to take corruption out of the party. They felt the party's reputation was suffering. They were right, because leading officials were corrupt. That leaves aside the question of actually what is the prime source of corruption, in my view, is being a one-party state in which you have full control. But anyway, he then started to remove huge numbers of people from senior positions in the People's Liberation Army, because the army of China is the party's army, it's not the state's army, from replacing them with generals that he appointed. And throughout the system, he's done that, and he continues to do that today. And in what he calls rectification campaigns, there's been 178,000 people rectified this year already, and so on. And so he changed the guard at the top. So he feels he can control that sector, but the danger is there's no one to succeed him when you personalize things, and he wants to in effect stand on a high mountain and be able to look everyone in the eye. They take their orders from him, and strangely he's actually said himself, oh, I'm a bit annoyed because officials won't make decisions until they see, my own script telling them what to do. Well, that's because he set it up like that. And so people are not making decisions, and people are worried now what will happen for the succession. He's likely next year, when the party Congress meets, I said this huge event, and endorses him for another 5 years, in effect another 10. Mind you, he'll still only in that 10 years be similar age to Joe Biden today. So, but if he keeps fit, he's going to keep going, because if he stops, if he stands still, what's going to happen to him and his family? These are big questions if you become a dictator. But he's a kind of odd dictator in that he's a dictator on behalf of this party that he sincerely serves, and he sincerely believes that China needs the party. And at the centenary, they all stood up and sang this song, without the Communist Party there will be no new China, meaning no prosperity. You wouldn't have a good life. And so you can't separate China from the party, and that the party is now, as I said in that earlier quote, leading the world in the way in the future. But this is high risk, and the demography is going against him. The working population is falling already. Young people are lying flat is the phrase, not really keen to do things, to expose themselves, to run risks. And you have to be a party member now to achieve anything significant. So I think he's got a lot of challenges. The economy is slowing. There's big, as you say, Evergrande, the big property giant, and other property companies are in trouble, and people don't have anywhere really to invest apart from in property. So middle class is now jacking up, and I think there's some of them again will, once COVID doors open and that allow them to leave, they'll slide away. And we'll see again Chinese students coming back to Australia, despite the big freeze between Australia and China politically. The middle class will want to slide away and give themselves different options from this China, which is heading to something, we're not sure what, but some kind of trouble may be in store. But Xi will be in charge. He'll have to cop it. So people blame, he wants all the praise for everything great that's happened. He's got to cop the blame similarly.
Well, will Xi be in charge? Our good friend and longtime supporter, Anthony, couldn't be here today, but he actually fed through some questions via email, and he wanted to know, how important are factions within the regime? What are their linkages? And is a coup d'etat possible?
Oh, well, history has shown that it has been possible. So in China's history, the number of smooth successions, even within dynastic imperial China, comparatively few. And only really one in the communist dynasty era. So yes, there is potential for trouble. I myself am not convinced that there are people plotting that they have a capacity to do anything. He has removed, as far as possible, faction, because he's got on top through unbelievably powerful tools of surveillance and control, through spending vast amounts of money on innovation in terms of online surveillance and so on, facial recognition technology, making it very difficult for people to talk to each other. The higher you get in the party, actually, the more difficult it is to plot. And people will be finding it very hard. And there were previously reasonably well charted factions. There was the Tuanpai, the youth league that Hu Jintao led, and there was the Taizedang, the princelings that Jiang Zemin, well, not really a princeling himself, but they coalesced around him. They're still alive, those figures, but seem to have quite little authority. I'm not really convinced that people are, but Xi himself is highly nervous about what might happen, and all the signs are that he guards his own safety very. He takes this as a very important priority. But I don't think that there are many people in the party who are right now planning to get rid of him, but many have personal friends who've been removed for corruption, which is kind of also what is corruption and what is disloyalty in a regime which doesn't really have the rule of law. There's no independent courts. They're all part of the legal and political commission of the party. So I'm a party official. My friends has been removed. My family is worried. People may stand back if eventually it comes to it, the time of succession, it's time to change again. We may see that, but I'm not betting on it.
Our viewer Benjamin wants to ask you what level of influence or coercive control Xi Jinping may have established, whether directly or indirectly, personal or via policy, over Western political leaders and Western influencers.
Oh, well, actually, not much control directly. He's tried his best in terms of commercial coercion with Australia is a good example, and certainly weaponizing China's economic heft has proven to be a fairly successful tool. So about $1 trillion worth of loans have been administered through the Belt and Road initiative, which is Xi's hallmark international policy, which has succeeded quite well and has brought China into a very solid position at multilateral arenas like the UN. Many states automatically vote for China. Interesting. Papua New Guinea, just Australia's closest neighbor, voted for China in a resolution about Hong Kong, for example. And so he's got more capacity to influence those states to which he's lending a large amount of money, apparently for infrastructure. There's some tears before bedtime in all that. Less influence in the West, but gradually it's come through. For example, Australian universities have become very dependent on Chinese students, and so in my view, they have tended to diminish their capacity for analyzing contemporary China. That's a sort of example of how things happen in the West, step by step. Leaders, I'm not so convinced, and we can see in Europe how things can change. People in democracies where people can find out things for themselves don't tend to be applauded for being coerced. Lithuania is a great example recently, and but China, of course, has kept many Western journalists are now out of China, not able to analyze it, but they're still writing, and we're still talking here today, aren't we, Salvatore?
Absolutely right. I have a question from another viewer, Sino Xenon. He notes that, or he or she actually, it's a pseudonym, notes that Xi has not left China in 2 years. Is this due to any fear of machinations against him if he were to leave the country, or even the possibility of an assassination attempt?
No, I don't think it is. That thought had crossed my mind, but I think it's more to do with setting an example in terms of the COVID policy. COVID's been something of a triumph for Xi. So at first it wasn't. At first people rightly blamed the party for trying to cover it up in Wuhan itself. But then I suspect Wang Huning, the great ideological maestro of the party of the last couple of decades, probably himself came up with this idea of Xi being called the people's leader, leading the people's war against COVID, and wartime calls for tough tactics. And so China is the only major country in the world still determined to eliminate COVID. And if you're an official in a small town, there's one case, you're in real trouble. So that, of course, that leads to questions about how much reporting, how good the reporting is. But he's trying to eliminate it. That will cover the Winter Olympics in Beijing in February, conveniently preventing awkward awkward questioning journalists being given visas or not given visas to go there and so on. So it's going, I think he's declaring solidarity with the people of China of not traveling, no contact. And of course, to an extent, China has been in a form of lockdown for a long time. So this new form of lockdown because of COVID is something that comes quite easily and readily. But the party has been applauded for it. I do believe comparatively few deaths. And so that's been a success for him. And I think by staying there, he's telling the people of China, I'm staying with you. We've done great. The rest of the world going to hell in a handbasket.
Rowan, we're rapidly running out of time, but I do want to squeeze in at least one more audience question. I'm sorry we won't get to all of your questions. Thanks everyone in the chat for being engaged. But we have a question from Marcus. Following on about your comments about factions within the CCP, how good a grasp do we really have on who are the senior key players today in the CCP and how much power they have?
That's a great question. It's more of a black box than it has been for many decades or longer. I actually believe that we know less about decision making at the top in China than we have since dynastic imperial days. And we used to, in the days even of Hu Jintao, the predecessor, one could, foreign diplomats, corporate leaders, Chinese and foreigners, journalists could talk to academics and others, bureaucrats, who would be talking to the advisors of top leaders. And so one will get a sense of what was happening. I myself had found that was quite handy because I got a sense of what they knew, what was happening. So we weren't really being surprised. But now, yes, it's a black box. So a good example was the national security law imposed in mid-2019 on Hong Kong that caught pretty well everyone by surprise. No one really knew. And very strong discipline at those levels, prevent anything leaking. Surveillance prevents those contacts. So we don't really know. There are 7 men on the Politburo Standing Committee. No woman has ever been elected to these Politburo Standing Committee in the party's 100 years. And so some of those are close to Xi himself, but there's no one of the generation down who's eligible really to succeed him there. So he has Wang Qishan, who's the vice president. He's close to Wang Qishan and has been for some time. Smart guy. And as I mentioned, Wang Huning, not related, who's on the Politburo Standing Committee, is a kind of ideological thinker. And Liu He, who's the economic guru, is someone whose advice Xi Jinping clearly takes. I think those 3 are probably the closest.
Rowan Callick, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Salvatore. Thanks, everyone who's been listening. And please get in touch if you want to ask more. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for your generosity there. Thanks also to our producer, Nico Malian. Our executive producer is Max Hawk-Weaver. The director of the Center for Independent Studies is Tom Switzer. I'm Salvatore Babonis. You can find us next week on Liberty, but you won't see me. My colleague Glenn Fay will be interviewing Michael Johnston of Victoria University of Wellington, who is co-host of the Free Kiwis podcast. You can find Glenn and Michael here next week at our usual time on Liberty.